You're listening to An Act of Courage, a podcast brought to you by Capracare, a global health non-for-profit organization focused on bringing better healthcare, services, and opportunity to the people of Haiti. I am your co-host, Nene Uwaomah.
And I am your co-host, Pierre-Louis. Throughout this season of An Act of Courage, we will be discussing climate change and the 3 steps of disaster relief, including preparedness, action, and rebuilding process. Each week, we'll explore the inspiring journeys, challenges, and triumphs of non-for-profits and the passionate public health professionals behind them. Whether you are a non-for-profit professional or volunteer, a doctor, or simply someone looking to learn more about how you can get involved, this podcast is your window into the heart of Capracare and the efforts of our courageous partners.
From thought-provoking interviews with industry leaders to thoughtfully crafted storytelling, piquing your curiosity, and expanding your knowledge, on a mission to provide you with insightful conversations and share the stories of changemakers who are dedicated to making our world a better place.
We'll hear from the visionaries, activists, and changemakers who are tackling some of the most pressing issues of our time, from education and healthcare to environmental conservation and social justice. Our goal is to inform, inspire, and empower you to join the ranks of those who are actively making a difference in the world.
So if you're ready to be inspired and discover the incredible impact that Capracare has on communities in Haiti and beyond, you're in the right place. We're thrilled to be your guide on this journey. Thank you for joining us, and let's get started. Hi, Josh. How are you?
I'm fine, Nene. How are you?
I'm doing well, thank you. How are you
Good.
doing, JP?
I'm doing well. I'm very happy to be here. Josh, welcome to our An Act of Courage podcast, season 4.
Well, it's an honor to be invited to be part of this. I'm really pleased to be here.
We're very excited to have you as well.
Thank you.
So thank you for joining us. And I would love to start the show just by having you introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit more about you.
Okay, well, I'm a 75-year-old retired college professor. I taught at Smith College in the School for Social Work. And all my career, I've focused on confronting oppression, like racism and colonialism, and also psychosocial capacity building and support when communities and individuals experience major disasters. So that's what I've been doing for most of my life, and I'm still doing it even though I'm officially retired.
Oh, that's amazing. So what made you want to get into the type of work that you do? You're a social worker, and you're engaged in these communities. What made you want to engage in this type of work?
You know, it's a really good question. I guess what made me want to engage in it is I feel that all people have a kind of responsibility to try and make the world a better place. And I know that sounds kind of corny, but it's like we're all connected with one another. And I felt like we all deserve respect, compassion, and equity. I've always been very aware of how unequal U.S. society is, the world is, and that the forces that I think have contributed to that, colonialism, racism, white supremacy, and other factors, I feel like they're not going to shift, they're not going to change, and people's lives are not going to get better unless we all work together to try and ameliorate them, really. So, I didn't have those ideas in the way I just said it to you when I was 10 years old or 15 or 22, but in some ways inside of me, that's what I thought and that's what I felt and that's how I wanted to be in the world.
That's amazing. And I imagine you've done so with all your experience and your field work. As you mentioned, you're a professor at Smith College and your research focused on racism and psychological capacity building in response to disasters. So how has your research reflected in your field work?
You know, Nene, I never have felt there's a separation. There's like a circle. And on that circle is research, writing, teaching, field work, practice, being a citizen, being a parent, all those things fit together for me. The kind of things I was saying to you about what I want to do with my life are present with all of them, and they inform each other. So if I'm working in Haiti with Capracare, that teaches me so much that then when I write a book about how to help people after disasters, I'm drawing on that experience and the wisdom that I learned from JP and from other people who were part of the project. Um, and and it goes the other way also. When I was teaching a course on racism, I had to read about it. I had to understand it historically, structurally, psychologically. And then once I understood it better, I was in a better position to try and confront racism, to try and confront it in the community, in society, or to help people who have been affected by racism deal with what they've internalized and the trauma that it causes. So I guess that's my answer to that, is that they're all connected. I don't separate them.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And it's funny you say that, Josh, because you mentioned the power of community, right? But you also travel to these places. So you've experienced, you breathe, you live, you touch, you smell everything that you are also teaching these folks as you learn about their community, and rounding them up and mobilizing them to take control of their own lives. So that is a very powerful thing.
It is, it is. And you know, when you and I worked together in Haiti, for example, um, I'm, I had some experience, I had some knowledge that I had learned from teaching or from other disasters, but you had a lot of knowledge and you had an understanding of your local community and all of the volunteers who you would put together. So I guess what I'm saying is I've learned that it's never one-sided. It's never a one-way street. It's always two-way. And so I'm learning about how do Haitians understand certain things? How does the community function? What are people's sources of strength and resilience? And maybe I'm bringing something. But I think what I've learned is it's really important for me to be as humble as I can be, because I used to think when I first started doing this, oh, I know what to do. I could teach people what to do. And then I realized, no, I don't really know what to do. If I'm in Haiti or Sri Lanka or Uganda or China, these are societies where people know so much more than me about what they've done in the past, what they've done in the present to help themselves. So, I had to step back and realize this is like a collaboration. This is something we all have to share together and map out together and do together.
It's great you mentioned that too, Josh, because each place bring their own qualities, right? They bring their own experience. Everyone has their own cultures, ways of doing things. So now you as a expert in the field, yeah, you can go to these places and teach them best practice and everything else. But I think what makes your ways of doing work is very unique is that, yeah, you take your own experience and from different cultures and background, but when you go to these places, you pretty much customize. You help them help themselves, right? You work with them hands in hand, right? To basically be able to come up with their own solution based on their own environment. So that is, it's very unique way of you saying that because yeah, I myself have experience, right? Ways of doing my own thing, but you've done the studies, you've done the research, you've done the teaching, but to be able to bring that to someone else who may not have that light, it's a two-way street. So it's not basically a one-way street. You bring to the table, they bring to the table, and then we meet in the middle.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And in some ways, I often don't like the term expert because I don't like hierarchies, that you're bringing me in from the outside after the earthquake because I'm an expert and I'm going to teach people things. Yeah, I mean, I know some stuff, but you knew a lot of stuff. And the other people who we were working with in the community and the volunteers also had a lot of wisdom and knowledge. And you're right that it has to be, every context is different. So like I learned a lot in Haiti, and I'm sure we'll get to this, Nene, about, the use of music and song, and doing things collectively. But when I got to China and I was talking to students about what we had done in Haiti, they were thinking, nah, we wouldn't have wanted to sing songs like that. We wouldn't have wanted to dance like that. You had to look at what in their culture was more meaningful for them. And it was different than what was meaningful for people in Haiti. So you're absolutely right. You have to take into account the society, the culture, its history, its practices, how people do things, what gives people pleasure, what gives people meaning, what gives people strength.
Josh, thank you for sharing that, because as you mentioned these things, what I'm feeling is that you lead with not a I mentality, but you lead with a we mentality.
I
Right?
try.
You definitely do. And the number one thing I also get too is that you have respect, right? Because you can understand, yeah, Haiti, they do it this way, here we do it that way, and you work with them to do it their way. That's really powerful. That's respect.
Well, thank you. Thank you, JB. That respect's very important for all of us.
Thank you for sharing, Josh. I appreciated what you had to say, especially given the different cultural perspectives when it comes to community-based work. And you mentioned the earthquake. And I know that after the 2010 earthquake in Haiti, you started the psychological first aid program that Capracare still uses today. What were some of the needs that you wanted to address during the development of these programs, and how was it in terms of growing in accessibility over the past 13 years?
Okay, well, that's a big question. I'll try and answer it. I'm going to need help from JP. We do this together.
It's a loaded one.
It's a loaded one. I think that, first of all, I have to just step back a second before I answer the question, which is I strongly believe that colonialism has shaped the world. Which countries have resources? Which countries have privileges? Which countries publish journals? Which countries develop something like psychological first aid? So the reason I'm saying that is over time, what I've learned is something like psychological first aid has some good things in it, but it was really developed for use in Western contexts originally, in Europe, the United States, and particularly among white people. And I guess what I learned is that every culture has a different way of doing psychological first aid. For me, psychological first aid is really after a major disaster, an earthquake, a war, a hurricane, anything you can think of that's a catastrophe. What do people need? Well, individuals need certain things. They need to feel safe. They need to be able to calm themselves down. They need to be able to eventually tell their story to other people. They need to be able to connect with other people. They need to start feeling like they're more sure of themselves, because they've lost their confidence very often. So there's lots of things individuals need, and psychological first aid traditionally focused on that. How do you teach a person how to calm down? How do you help a person feel safer? And certainly after the earthquake, that was a major thing going on in Fonfred, where we were. There were people we knew who had been in the earthquake, and they didn't want to go inside. They couldn't sleep at night because they were worried another earthquake was going to happen. So they needed psychological first aid on an individual level. But what I learned in Haiti, and also I'd say in Uganda, and to some extent Sri Lanka, and when I've worked with First Nations in Canada, is that some societies are much more collective in their orientation, and that when you have a major disaster, it affects the entire society. So things like when we were in Haiti, teachers weren't going into schools. They were afraid to go into schools. When people died, there are grieving and mourning practices that Haitians have developed over centuries, and they weren't being used because people were so shocked, so stunned. So that I guess the reason I'm saying this is, for me, what I learned about how Capracare understood psychological first aid is, yeah, if I was working with you one-on-one and you would experience this, I would try to help you center yourself, ground yourself, move on with your life day by day. But that also you need to do it with a group. You need to do it with the community. And you need to do it in a way where the community is being given psychological first aid as well as individuals.
Wow, very powerful, Josh. Thank you for sharing that.
And as far as like how it's evolved, I really need you to talk about that, John, because I came that one time, and part of what I loved about what we did is it wasn't me coming in, doing a little bit of therapy with people, going home. There's no therapists who were there. You and your team took what we were doing together and kept building on it. And I'd love to hear what you did.
Well, you know, what I'll say is that you came in and you work with us to create the system of train the trainer. So it's a train the trainer model, right? So you're not just coming in to just tell us what to do. You work with our team so we know what to do when you leave. And that's exactly what we did. We continued it. And over time, we built a little bit on what you taught us. As you remember, you're from a student who volunteered with Capracare, mentor, right? And we had other mental health professionals who are Haitians who also came and to add on to your training. So ever since then, the team has continued to work on providing psychological first aid when there's a disaster. And there has been many. You went to Haiti with us when you were, well, you gave the numbers earlier. You said you're 75 now.
Yeah.
And this is now Capracare is 15 years later, right? So that's 15 years ago.
Right.
Of adding to your work. And since 2010, we've had Hurricane Matthew in 2012. We had chikungunya outbreak in 2014. 2016, we had Hurricane Matthew, which was big in southern Haiti. And then between that, we've had other disasters as well, hurricanes, and of course, the big assassination of the president on July 7th, 2021. Then we had the big 7.2 magnitude earthquake on August 14, 2021, right? And today, here we are in 2024, and people are having to protest the current prime minister. They want him out, shut down. You've had, a lot of changes since then. So we have been able to use those techniques, those strategies that you taught us, that we worked together on, that we came up with to continue providing those support to the community. So that's how we have evolved. So every day now we go to the schools. We go to the school and talk with the students, those who are having issues because they lost a parent who was providing support, financial support, or just to help them live their life, right? Those who experience loss, those whenever they hear that there's gonna be an earthquake, who immediately reverting back to their traumas. Those who can't sleep because they're hearing gunshots from folks who wants the president to be out. So we have learned a lot, and we have built a lot since then to continue to provide those supports to the community. And that is by your grace. That is by your support for kicking us, jumpstart, kicking this program off the ground to what it is today.
Well, that's really good to hear. And, what you're describing is, for me, the ideal of how it should work, which is that, the Capracare team are people from the community, and they're there all the time. So they're not just coming in because there's been a disaster. They live there, or they did live there. And so they know the community, they know the cultural practices. And so you take something like psychological first aid. We did a training of trainers model. So you have a whole group of people who've been trained and who can then train other people. And it can keep spreading out. And that's one of the things that makes it very attractive to me, because, it used to be that people thought, well, you need therapy after a disaster. And I feel like, well, look, in most parts of the world, people don't go to therapy. Most parts of the world, there aren't therapists. And yeah, you can parachute them in if there's an earthquake, but they're going to leave in 2 weeks or a month. And then what? And what happened with Capracare is that you folks took something, you made it your own, you developed it, and you're continuing to do it, so that the psychological first aid isn't just what you're doing one-on-one with people. It's this group, this cadre of volunteers that the community knows is there, that interacts with the community on an ongoing basis. So I think, for me, that's the ideal of how this should work. I just want to say one other thing. You mentioned all the disasters after the earthquake. And again, I have to state this. I really believe that a legacy of colonialism is that countries like Haiti are more prone to the kind of things you were sharing than countries like England, where I am right now, or the United States, where there are more resources. It's more like they have more shock absorbers that can take this so that if there is like a flood or an earthquake, they can quickly deal with it. They have the technology, they have the resources. And also, they are, I think there's a relationship between poverty and disaster. It's not like disaster affects everybody equally. People who have less resources are more adversely affected by a disaster. And so in a country like Haiti, which is not as wealthy as England, let's say, then the disaster interacts with that, and it makes it even more challenging for people. Having said that, we'll get to this later, I'm sure, Nene, which is that I also think that in Haiti and in other countries that have experienced a lot of oppression and adversity, there's also strength, resilience, and wisdom that's been learned from dealing with that over time.
Well, that's absolutely true. You know, you make the analogy about countries like the U.S. or those developed nations that have shock absorbers, right? And they do pivot easier, they do bounce easier when they do have their quote unquote on disasters. It's not the same as Haiti. And I think that's where, you know, you often hear the phrase Haitians are very resilient. And I often ask myself, are we really resilient or are we just trying to survive?
Right.
Right? Because resiliency for me would mean that we bounce back better. But I don't always feel like we bounce back better.
Yeah.
You know, and I feel like that's not a good word of describing our strength. Is yeah, we are strong people, but by nature, it's humans' instinct to try to survive whatever that they went through. And I think oftentimes when I keep hearing that Haitians are very resilient, you know, yeah, I don't think that word favors us, because I think that word actually hurts us in a way, because people think that, oh, we good, and we're not. We are human like anybody else. We're just trying to survive. We're trying to do better for ourselves, but we don't absorb those shocks, forgive my accent, as well, right? As those countries that do have those buffers. And people are worse off. And I believe right now the Haitians are worse off right now than they were in 2010, believe it or not. You know, we've had experience, all of this just that has happened. I don't feel like the country's even in a better state. Right now, they don't even have a government, right? They don't even have a government, and you have the world economy is hurting them. Political crisis is hurting them. Natural disaster has hurt them, and I don't feel like how can we stay today and say they are resilient, they are better, because we are not better. I say we because I'm also Haitian. We're not better, right? But your teaching, then the way that we practice is, yeah, it's not a therapy. It's really a form of one-to-one speak with and giving people a chance to release what's on their mind, right? Giving that platform to talk and get things off their chest, and to be able to move better and find within them their strength on how to deal with these issues better.
Yeah. I'm really glad you brought that up, because, you know, resilience is a very controversial term. And you're absolutely right. You have to be careful. I have to be careful. Everybody has to be careful about how we use it, because it can be made to seem like, well, people who have experienced a lot of hardship, they're more resilient. And as you're saying, resilience also is like in social structures and wealth and dams and irrigation systems and trees that soak up rain and things like that. So, you know, Haiti lost a lot of its resilience because of centuries of oppression, colonialism, isolation, that really its legacy is still being felt today. Um, so I'm not sure what the right term is, but I do think that what I learned working in Haiti and in every country I've been in is that also people had learned things. People had sources of strength. People knew how to survive terrible things in a way that was unique to Haiti. And, you know, like when we get to it, we could talk about like the use of music and the use and doing that collectively, which I think to me is that if it's not a sign of resilience, it's a sign of cultural strength. It's a cultural practice that is part of what makes Haitians stronger, even though Haiti as a country is terribly weakened by the centuries of colonialism and racism.
Absolutely. Yeah, I definitely think, you know, the word for us would be courage. We are very courageous people, but not necessarily resilient in the way that people tends to describe, because the infrastructures do not get better. They get weakened, right? And people have to find the strength and the courage to move on with what they end up with every time these things happen. So it's pretty deep. It's pretty deep. And then I know you hit dying to ask another question, so go for it.
Definitely am. This conversation is invigorating. It is. And it's very reflective, Josh, of your publication titled When There Are No Therapists, a psychoeducational group for people who have experienced social disasters. How do these individuals receive the support they need in terms of the different aspects, having a holistic approach of getting back into what is deemable as regular life, returning to school, interacting with their family, reintroducing themselves into the world? How do they go about this given the traumas and the disasters that they experience?
Wow, you tend to ask very big questions that certainly, we could spend a couple of hours answering them, which they're great questions. I really appreciate how complicated they are. I think that you're right. It has to be holistic. You mentioned that word.
Yes.
So you can't just work with individuals. You have to work, like when we were in Haiti, we were working with the church, we were working with schools, we were working with different sectors of the community.
That's right.
So I think you have to do it on different levels and you have to do it holistically. But the reason that I think that we had some success in Haiti from the sound of it is that we were doing it with local people like JP, Capracare, all the volunteers who had credibility, who had commitment. And so I guess, getting back to your question, I think whenever there's a disaster, I'm always wary of the big multinational NGOs, the international NGOs. They come in and say, here's how we do it. This is how we help people recover. Yeah, it's true. They know certain things, but they're not taking into account what's on the ground, who lives there, what the cultural practices are. And like what JP just shared about what's going on in society, politically, economically, that you need to understand that. And as an outsider, you never understand that in the way that people who live it understand it. So I think you have to identify local people and particularly local organizations that can take leadership in a community after a disaster. And they have to feel empowered to take whatever I share, whatever I say, like, here's psychological first aid. It says, try this, try this, try this. They have to say, well, wait a minute, we don't do it that way.
Yeah.
Or this is a better way to do it.
Yeah.
And again, later on, I'll give you an example of like in Haiti, how music was very central to the psychological first aid. But JP, you wanted to say something.
No, I would say tell us now, Josh, because we did experience those those skit that we did. That we had given it a name. I forgot the name. How we use the music to kind of bring inspiration. So yeah, definitely share us with that experience with us.
Well, one of the things that you and I both noticed, and coming from the United States, you're Haitian American, but you were coming from another country, was that everywhere we went, there were people practicing hip hop.
Yeah.
They were writing songs, they were performing them, and it was clear to me, at least, that this was something that people got pleasure from, meaning from, and shared with other people. And so instead, when we were talking about psychological first aid, when we were working with teachers, for example, they were afraid to go back into the schools. So we realized that we needed to do two things. We needed to give people a way they could tell their story that told about the trauma and the suffering and the fears and the anxiety. But the second thing they needed was to talk about what gave them confidence, what gave them a sense of strength. What have Haitians learned about what it means to be a strong Haitian? And so we said, well, instead of people just talking about it or writing about it, let's sing it. And so we formed groups, and that was the other part of it, because what we noticed was people were doing things in groups, not just individuals. And when we formed groups, we said, write a hip hop song that looks at what the suffering was and what the strength is. And then all these groups split off. They thought about it, they practiced, they wrote, and then they performed their songs with one another. And so, I don't know, that was one of the more powerful moments in my career, was when we were in a school and all these teachers and the principal, they all did this, and then they came back. And so it kind of touched on what they were afraid of, what they had lost, but it also touched on their sense of confidence, their sense of efficacy, the sense that, you know what, we've been knocked down before and we can get up. Now, it didn't solve everything, but actually it made them feel more confident being in schools. And we couldn't have done that if we hadn't done it first with the volunteers, because we did it with the volunteers, and then the volunteers spread out when we went to the school, and everybody, all the volunteers were helping the teachers do it. So another example of the training of trainers model. But to me, that's an example of where we took something that was right in front of us. It seemed to be what the community, or at least some people in the community, were drawn to. And it was a language, it was a mode of expression that seemed to fit. So I don't know what you think.
And I think that's what Nene was referring to earlier about, how do people come back after a disaster, right? Especially in those kind of settings, come back to the workplace, come back to the school. And every time we've had disasters, is the same element we go back to, talking with the students, talking with the teachers, even our own staff, is trying to get back into that mood, positive mood, right? Whether it's a song that resonates with you, or a dance that resonates with you, something to kind of get your mood back in a positive way. So those are the same techniques that we applied every time that they have to get back after COVID, get back after Hurricane Matthew, get back after earthquakes or hurricane, or get back after 2 weeks of no school because there was continuous protest that was going on the ground. And school could not open, work could not open. People were afraid to go shopping. People were afraid to go out unless they had an emergency that they need to go out there for.
Right.
Absolutely.
Yeah. You reminded me of something else, which is when there's a major disaster, like all the ones you're describing. The earthquake is one I experienced, the aftermath of, but you've been there or been aware of other ones. It's almost like things get frozen. You're in the middle of something like, it's not safe to go inside. We don't have jobs. The schools are closed. And you're caught in the present moment. And it's like you're frozen and you're stuck. And there's this concept called transitional pathways, which Judith Landau and Jack Saul developed. And they're New Yorkers and they're psychologists. And what they say is, when that happens, what you have to do is two things. You have to reestablish the pathway to the past, the cultural practices. Like you and I found that people were not grieving and mourning in the way that they used to do because they were frozen.
Yes.
And one of the things Capracare did was to try and visit people who had lost people and encourage them to have a funeral and to do it in a Haitian way.
Yeah.
And, that there had to be a grieving and mourning process that was meaningful to people. So that would be an example of the past. But there also has to be a future, a pathway to the future. And for that, people need some hope. They need to believe that they can do something that can make it better. Now, that's hard, as you well know, as you were saying. When there's been so many disasters, people can say, here we go again. I'm discouraged. There's nothing we can do about this. And part of what you have to do at Capracare is say to people, it feels like that. We understand that. I feel that too. But we need to look at what are the things we can do, even if they're very small, just an inch, 2 inches, that we can move in the right direction towards a better future to get out of this.
That's right. Get them to unstuck themselves.
That's right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I'm so glad you mentioned the word efficacy, self-efficacy. So I wanted to ask, one of the biggest challenges during these types of experiences is building that encouragement, trying to get the people to build back up their efficacy, their self-efficacy after going through the traumas that they've experienced.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. And so part of it is you can never sound like people know if you're saying something that doesn't really make them feel like they're stronger or that they can move forward. You know, if I say every human being can move forward, don't worry about it, you're going to feel that. It just sounds like I'm spouting things that are, you know, I'm trying to make people feel better, but it's not making them feel better. So I need to acknowledge how, and we, all of us need to acknowledge this sucks. We're really stuck. This was terrible what happened. We can't sugarcoat it. What we lost was a lot. The odds against us moving forward, there's a lot of hurdles. There's a lot of roadblocks. But that's where psychological first aid comes in, I think, which is let's break it down. What would be one small thing we could do differently? And, you know, that would make us feel better, and it would be a little different than where we're stuck right now. And so I think that's the thing. We're not going to try and solve everything. We're not going to move forward in a great leap, but we're going to maybe move forward slowly, like I said, inch by inch, and we'll just take one thing or two things and figure out how can we make some progress with that. And individuals can think about it, groups can think about it, the community can think about it. It might be different for different people, but I think the key thing is to break it down into manageable bits. And that's offering people hope. It might not be hope that you're going to be wealthy or that these things aren't going to happen again in the future, but it might be hope we're not just stuck here. We can move forward and there's something we can do. And just moving forward that 1 inch, that starts to create a sense of self-efficacy. Wow. You know, I thought I was just stuck in this. I couldn't do anything, but I did this. Nene did this. JP did this. We're moving forward. We didn't jump forward, but we're not just stuck. We're starting to move forward a little bit.
Hi friends, taking a pause from this empowered conversation to highlight a pretty big dream we've cast this year. Did you know Capracare is a Haitian-led mission designed to improve the resiliency of its people through community building and health services? That's a pretty fancy way to say that we truly care about caring for Haiti's people. And this year, we're activating community to take part in helping us reach for 3 audacious dreams. A monthly donation fuels these dreams in 3 ways: by helping us screen 25,000 Haitian women for cervical cancer, by training 500 community health workers for emergency response and disaster relief programs, and by providing mental health counseling to 10,000 children and adults suffering from PTSD. We must dream big because the needs are big. Join our global health movement by becoming a monthly donor. We've got a special name for this committed group of friends. They're called change makers. Monthly giving at any level has a compounding effect on our work, and by carving out even $5 in your monthly budget, your gift joins many others to deliver unprecedented levels of hope and healing to our people. Take your support to the next level and become an active part of our mission by becoming a change maker today. Visit capracare.org/changemakers to set up your monthly donation. It's quick and impactful. Now let's get back to this inspired conversation.
The other part of your question is that what's so exciting for me is to hear what Capracare is still doing, because, you know, it's not enough to just do it and then leave it. Capracare keeps it going. And so that, I think, is essential to creating a sense of collective efficacy and self-efficacy. And I think they go together. If people see the community moving forward, that makes them feel like they can move forward. If individuals move forward, then the community starts to move forward. They're never separate. They go together.
And that is momentum, right? That each person can build off that other person's momentum and get everybody to start moving forward again.
Momentum and sustainability. I mean, that's the thing about Capracare. There's been sustainability. It wasn't like there was an earthquake, people came in, okay, go back to your life. But Capracare's still there. New things have happened, and Capracare's dealing with them, and hopefully not going back to what it was like before during the earthquake. Even if and people regress. That's the other thing I want to say. It's not like you just move forward in a straight line. It's never like that for individuals, for communities, for any of us. So it's really acknowledging when we regress, when we go backwards, but remembering that when we were there before, we were able to move forward. So how can we do it again?
Absolutely. You've mentioned Capracare's structure and mobilization efforts and how effective that they are and how efficient that Capracare is in regards to having the community members on the ground. And how quick they are to respond. Have other organizations that you've worked with been as effective in the response and as efficient when it comes to community disasters?
Yeah, no, that's a great question because for me, Capracare stands out because of the fact that everybody comes from the community and has stayed with the community. They're not going around trying to solve problems in Mexico or even in other parts of Haiti necessarily. This is the community that they're committed to. I haven't had that in other parts of the world, but as JP said, each disaster is unique, and also each, I would call it the social ecology. So if I go to Sri Lanka and there was a civil war going on when they had a tsunami, so they had two major disasters, terrible interethnic civil war, and this huge tsunami that killed lots of people. So I worked with an organization called the Center for Peace Building and Reconciliation. So they were working on the Civil War. They didn't know the skills of helping people recover from a tsunami, but they already were there. And so when I was able to work with them, a little bit like I worked with Capracare, they had an organizational structure and they were part of the community where they could continue and they could build out their peace building and conflict transformation work and include in that psychosocial recovery and psychosocial health. And the other thing I was going to say is I always use the word psychosocial because I like it better than mental health, because mental health makes it sound like you have feelings, thoughts, emotions that are like separate from what's going on outside of me. I don't think it's ever separate. So I think what's going on socially, historically, in the community, culturally, is part of our psychology. And so psychosocial for me means we work on all of that together. It's never a separate type of thing.
So how do communities that don't have as many accessible services receive the psychosocial support that they need during these times of crises?
Yeah, you're right. I'll give you an example that I think responds to your question. Tell me if it doesn't. I've been going to Uganda for about 15 years now. They had a terrible civil war. There were child soldiers, a lot of people were killed. And I worked with one tribe, one ethnic group. And, I went over once and we were doing our thing kind of like we did in Haiti, like I did in Haiti, but there was no organizational structure. And so one of the things that I did with people on the ground was I met with them and we talked about what would it take to have something like Capracare, but the Ugandan equivalent. And so we got a priest, a healthcare worker, a teacher, a social worker, a women's leader, and we together formed a new group. Now, again, it's a little bit like Capracare. Uganda's a poor country. They couldn't fund that. People had to work in the fields. People had to do their living. But they were all committed to this. They were committed to their community. So one of my jobs was to go back to the US and try and get funds to support the work that they were doing. Not tell them how to do it. I was kind of helping them think it out, but to kind of help them create the organizational structure that was not there that can continue this. And it's been going for 15 years now. So it doesn't always happen that way. There are times I've gone into a community and I feel like things just kind of fizzle out. And that's just the way it is. It means but I've been learning there either has to be an organization like Capracare or you have to help local people figure out what kind of organization they need and how can you help them to sustain it and keep it going.
Absolutely. That was going to be my next question as well. You touched down in these communities, in these places. How do you navigate when there's so much going on? Where are your first steps? How do you address the problem when there's not necessarily a primary issue? There's just so many things going on. Where do you start?
That's a great question, and you're absolutely right. And it would be very arrogant if me, an older white male college professor from the US, goes into the places that we're talking about and said, I can help you. So, like if you look at what happened with Haiti, I had a student who was Haitian American who took my course on on psychosocial capacity building. Then the earthquake happened and he was really distressed. And he said, is there something we can do in Haiti? And I said, well, do you know any local organizations? I don't know whether he already knew you, JP, or not, but he told me about Capracare, and he put us in touch. And I imagine he put in a good word for me with you.
Yes, it
So
is.
what I was going to say is that, so first of all, you and I had to meet, and you and I had to start to trust each other and talk about your philosophy and your view and how I did and what my approach was. And then when we went to phone Fred, I was with JP. So JP said, this guy is okay. You can trust him. I trust him. We're going to work together. If I had gone into that village without that, people would look at me like, what is he doing here? Who is this guy? We don't know anything about him. And I didn't know anything about the village. So I was relying on JP to constantly help me understand, to come up with ideas. When we would do things, JP was translating into Creole all the time, right? But when I say translating, it wasn't just language. It was like ideas, thoughts, practices. He was the person who understood where I was coming from and where the village was coming from. It could be that go-between. So that's just an example, I think, Nene, of how the first thing you need to do is find people from the local community and start talking to them and getting to know one another, who can then bring you in and present you and make it clear that this is a collaborative enterprise. This is not some expert from up here who's going to tell you what to do, but this is an asset, a person who we can trust and work with, and who hopefully can be helpful to us.
And you know what's funny, Josh, as I was translating some of your stuff, is some of the things that you would say doesn't exactly translate so well, right? But I had to make it translate for them to understand. So when you translate in these technical terms, you really have to make it very cultural, so therefore it connects to exactly, what is being said in some way, shape, or form. Does that make sense?
It totally makes sense. And I want to say something else. The way you did it was also very important, because like, here I am, I'm this older white guy from the US, and I'm a college professor. So I could say, all right, you need to do this, this, this. Well, JP would go, he'd start almost dancing. He'd be, like really expressive, using his hands. I use my hands too, but he was doing it in a way that's unique to not just him, but to the way people were communicating. And so the idea that I came up with was being expressed in a way, not just the content, but the way it was being conveyed was something that people could really, wow, I'm going to pay attention to this. Yeah, I see where he's going with this. And then I started learning. I started being more expressive because I was seeing how JP was doing it. So I wanted to be like that, or more like that, so people could kind of, I don't know, understand me expressively, not even linguistically or culturally.
And that is the feel, right? When you speak a language, you pick up the verbal cues, right? You pick up certain sound, you pick up certain rhythm. So when you translating, as my experience when I was translating, I had to feel the rhythm of what you were telling me to share with them, and then how to translate that so therefore it connects the light bulb for them. So it was really a dance, like, right? There was definitely a rhythm there that I had to kind of keep that flow going. Yeah,
absolutely. It was a dance, and the thing is, it's really, translation is maybe not even the right word. It was like interpretation, and co-leadership.
Yeah,
really.
absolutely.
And so I think that, to me, that's again the way ideally it works best.
You know what resonates for me when you mentioned that, when you just mentioned this, Josh, is that when we were going to Haiti, traveling through DR, right, we saw how the traffic was. It was very congested, right? And we were having a discussion about traffic. How do people drive in these different places that do not have the same structures for driving as America, right? And we said there's a dance. You just have to know the dance, right? So therefore we don't step on each other people's toes, right? So as I was translating, it was that for me. It was like, okay, I know this rhythm, I know this dance. So how to transfer that now to them? Because you can't tell them, oh yeah, red light, green light, yellow light, this is what you do. There's none of that there. But we do know how to stop, when to go, when to slow down. So making that bridge, bridging that gap, bridging it from what you was telling me, what I was sharing with them, and for them to make the connection, that was very special. Yeah.
Yeah. You know, you just made me think of something else. You're absolutely right. That it was a dance. We were doing it together with other people in the group. And that was the way to really convey the ideas as opposed to a dry lecture or a PowerPoint or something like that. When I went to Uganda and I was working in the situation I was telling you about, there was a woman who was at a training who was a volunteer, and she described something that was just terrible. You know, like the translator started to cry and couldn't translate it. It was really terrible. But I was working alongside a priest who was from this tribe and who was very respected and trusted in the community. And he got up and he said how terrible that was. He talked to people about it. And then he said, does anybody know a song or a song and a dance that we can do that makes us feel better right now? And suddenly the woman who had told the story got up and she led the whole group in a song and a dance. And everybody was doing it. You know, they were dancing, they were clapping. And it was like, I could never do that. You know what I mean? I could hardly keep up with the dance because I'm not a great dancer. But what I'm saying is that if he hadn't been there, I wouldn't have known what to do. There's no way I could have soothed people. There's no way I could have helped people process what had just been brought up. And I think you were doing that with Capracare and Informed Fred when we were working together.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. There was definitely great synergies there. You know, Josh, speaking of stories, and I kind of mentioned I alluded to when we were in DR, we should talk about our experience going to DR. From the border, from the bus broken down, the driver picking up his cell phone looking for a signal. We may have to go back a little bit to tell folks what that experience was like before we even got there to do the relief work.
Yeah, well, do you want to start or do you want me to start?
You should start. You definitely go for it.
Well, again, one of the points you're making is we couldn't even go directly to Haiti.
Yeah.
We had to go to the DR to get to Haiti. And you know better than me, the relationship between the DR and Haiti is a very complicated one.
That's right.
You know, and on some levels, there's a lot of racism and elitism in the DR when it comes to Haiti and Haitians. So anyway, we had to take a bus, and you know, you were describing some of the details that went on with the bus, and the kind of conditions the driver was dealing with.
Yeah.
But I remember we stopped in a village in the DR just before we got to the border with Haiti. And when people realized that we were a busload full of Haitians going to Haiti, they started getting really aggressive. And we all had to pile back in the bus, and the bus had to take off. And there were people banging on the windows and trying to get in the door. And it was like we really had to hustle to get out of there. And then when we got to the border, they closed, we were about to go through and they closed the border all night. We had to wait until the next morning. We didn't have any place to stay. We were in a bus. We just had to sit in the bus and wait it out, you know, and until we got through. And again, I wasn't as old as I am now, but I have to tell you, that was not easy for me. Like my ankles were swollen, you know. It took us, I think, 2 or 3 days before we got to phone Fred.
Yeah.
Because then we got to Port-au-Prince, we also had to then navigate how to get, you know, through Port-au-Prince and get out into the countryside. Roads were all broken up. People were living in the medians between different lanes and alongside of highways. It was really a very desperate scene. And just getting there actually took a lot of effort.
It was. And we literally went there, within like 3 weeks of the earthquake. So
Yeah.
it was still very fresh. And when our bus broke down, you're right. The people were like, they were kind. But once they discovered that we were Haitian, they're like, oh, they're going to Haiti? That means that bus is full of supplies, materials, things that they could want. And they started to ask for money. And the drivers tried to find a signal by getting on top of the bus. And the next thing you know, we were able to make the transfer to a new one and just bust our way out of there, right? And then to get into the border, all that stuff. So it was, you know, when you describe that kind of stories, it brings back, you know, again, the key word, courage, right? It wasn't that we were not scared to go there, but it took courage for us to go there. It took courage for those Haitians who are on the bus to go to Haiti during that rough time to go try to see what support they can bring to their family. Yeah.
No, it took courage for everybody, and not even, the people who were going to help with Capracare, but all the people on the bus
Yeah.
who would, come in and were trying to help somebody or some community. And it took courage for the people who were living there, and who had experienced it, to be willing to try to help others in their community. And that's one of the things I've learned, is if you can help other people, that helps you.
Mhm.
Like when some of the people who were volunteers had experienced direct losses, when they helped other people, they started feeling better about themselves and their situation. But yeah, courage is something that I saw from people who were already there and among the people who were going there. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I know you and JP can go back and forth all day about all the stories that you've
We
endured
could, we
over
could.
the years.
Right. Keep us on track.
We can get back to some of them soon. But I want to go back to how you mentioned how trust is so important in these situations, going into these communities when you're basically an outsider, and how the lady in Uganda and JP was a bridge for communication and to be trusting in these communities. So how do you see your partnership necessarily with Capracare contributing and benefiting the future of humanitarian health and relief efforts in Haiti? And how can you also um, use that in other experiences globally when you go into other communities and help with their crises and aid with their efforts?
Yeah, well, I'm really glad you asked that question, because I haven't gone back to Haiti since that time, but some of my students have volunteered for Capricare and have gone. And the way I kind of moved was I went to other parts of the world, but I was using what I had learned from my work with Capricare. And when I wrote the book that came out a few months ago about working in different, there were two books that referenced what happened in Haiti. And so I figured if I could take what I learned from working in Haiti and write about it and try and draw some lessons from it and share it with people around the world, then other people could take it and run with it and do whatever they wanted with it. And one of the things that we said earlier, which I think is critical, is that there's no model that fits every community. But there are certain things, like that we should have partnerships, that local people should be in charge of their destiny, and that outsiders should not impose their values or their understanding of what it means to be a person and how to get better if you're suffering on other people. So it's kind of a combination of looking at what were some of the things that I learned in Haiti that I think were truths that could be shared anywhere, but also what were some of the things where it was like, you need to figure out in your community, your country, what you think will make most sense about how to do this. But because I was a professor, because I could write articles and books and stuff, it meant I felt like I should take advantage of that. I could keep talking to my students, or I could keep going back to Haiti, but if I can share this with a bigger and bigger population, then again, my goal is that people, they hear it, they read it, they think about it, and they decide whether or not it's valid for them, and if it is, how they want to use it. It's never a formula. It's more like, how do you take what's being shared, rework it, and make it your own in a way that's helpful to you and your people.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, especially for saying that. I want to emphasize that a little bit. It's never a formula. There's never one way to help a community. Every community is different, as you stated, and there's different cultural perspectives that need to be taken into account. Not everyone's going to respond the same, as you mentioned, how in Haiti it was more effective for them to dance and sing. In China, that wasn't really the way that they wanted to go about it. So it's definitely needs to be taken into account that there's not just one size fits all type of method when going into these countries, into these communities, and helping with their relief efforts.
Yeah. And again, the importance of having local people. So like in China, calligraphy is something that's very Chinese and was very helpful. Women doing embroidery was a way they could recover from the earthquake and make some money. I didn't know that. You know what I'm saying? But the Chinese colleagues I was working with, they could figure that out with local people.
Absolutely. Thank you. I imagine you've learned so much over the years, given your decades of experience and work. And I want to know what are some of the major things that you've learned along the way?
Okay. Well, I've learned, again, how much I don't know. And that no matter, no matter how many years I've done this, no matter how many times I've done this, there's so many things I don't understand. And that's why I need to do this in partnership with other people. And together we can try and understand things. JP talked about courage, and I don't consider myself an excessively brave person. But what I have learned is that no matter how daunting a situation is, if there are people on the ground who've been affected, and there are people who want to work on helping people, then something can be done. No matter how overwhelming, no matter how hopeless it seems to be, things can always get better. And all of us can think of situations going on right now in the world, and we think, how could you do anything there? And I wouldn't be able to say that off the top of my head. But if we went there and started meeting with some people who were on the ground and said, look, this is what's going on, this is what we need, this is how we do things, this is the historical and social context, political context, we could figure out how to do that kind of moving forward inch by inch. And that we wouldn't necessarily say, there's nothing we can do. So I guess that's something I've learned. There's always something, and I think the other thing is what I just said, which is you have to set small goals. You can't go in with a savior complex. You can't think we're going to really transform society and achieve social justice, which has been elusive for so many years. But we can keep that in the back of our mind, that that's a really important value to inform what we're doing. But to think small is okay.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Josh. Thank you so much for sharing with us. Thank you so much for being here today. I feel like we've learned a lot from you. And I also want to try and end the show on a high note, something a little bit different here that we like to do at the end of the podcast, the end of the show. What is something interesting about you that the audience hasn't learned today? It could be outside of your work, something that you'd like to share so that they can get to know you a little better.
Okay. I just want to say I've appreciated the opportunity to be here. I've loved your questions, Nene, and JP. It's just been great to go back and forth, kind of like we did when we were in Haiti together, and and collaborate on this podcast because everything's been shared. Something about me, I lived in Ireland when I was in my 20s, and Ireland is a very musical society. And while I was there, I learned how to play the tin whistle, which is an instrument that's used in Irish traditional music. And I still play it. And I try to play a little bit every day.
That's very nice. That's very nice.
Well, Josh, right before we end our episode and show for today, you came out with this wonderful book that I'm sharing for those who are watching on YouTube. Can you tell us how to get this book and share with those who are listening, who might be able to see what I'm showing on the screen, the title of your book and what it's about and how they can get it?
Well, thank you, JP. And again, I'm not here to sell my book, but if the book can help people, that's what I care about. It's called Psychosocial Responses to Socio-Political Targeting, Oppression, and Violence. And so it looks at, there are disasters like the earthquake, but then there are ongoing historical disasters like racism, like the legacies of genocide, like what's going on in the Middle East right now. And so I feel like the book is looking at, if people have gone through that type of thing, what can help them? And I'm trying to draw from experiences like the ones I had in Haiti and other parts of the world, but it's really, I'm really trying to challenge the Western mental health model that kind of acts as if white mental health professionals from well-off countries understand what's going on with people who are in different sociocultural environments. And what I'm also looking is how do you decolonize practices? How do you make sure that practices that were marginalized? I mean, just as an example, when I was working with First Nations in Canada,
Right.
a lot of their practices have been marginalized.
Yeah.
They've been told you shouldn't practice this. It's not helpful. But you need this. You need psychological first aid the way we've taught it. And what the book tries to do is say, no, there are sources of wisdom in every culture, in every society. How do you draw them out? How do you recenter them? How do you make sure that you don't colonize again with ideas about how to help people?
Absolutely, because if there's one thing I speak to the Haitian culture, you may teach people how to do certain things, but if they don't really believe it, they're not gonna practice it, and they're gonna default to their own ways of doing things. And we can hold this for another episode, talk about religion and practices, and that's what we do in Haiti, right? You teach us one, if we doing it because we have to, yeah, we may go through of doing it because we have to, but we also know that we have our own cultural ways of doing things ourselves. So if the people do not believe in what is may have been imposed on them, they're gonna default to their way that they feel good about themselves to do things. So Josh, thank you so much for being with us today. One last question. Folks are very big on social media. Are you on any social media? If they want to get in contact with you via social media, if they can follow you on social media, if not, what's another way that they can get in touch with you? Whether it's an email, we know you're on Google. We could just put Josh L. Miller. We'll see all the different books you have produced over the years. But if they want to directly get in touch with you, how can they do so?
Thanks for the question. Listen, I'm a dinosaur. I am not on social media of any kind.
No Twitter.
But I do use email, and I have an email address at Smith College, jlmiller@smith.edu. You can Google me at Smith College, and the email will come up. And anybody who wants to ask me something, give me feedback, whatever, I'd be happy to get an email and be in conversation. So thanks for giving me that opportunity.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much.
And we'll definitely put that into our show notes, your contact as well, so they could get it.
Okay.
It's a shame that we're not gonna get a chance to, follow you on Twitter, follow you on your Instagram, follow you on your Facebook, stalk you in those places. But
That's for the younger people like you. I'm not going to be following both of you on Twitter.
You got it, Josh. It was wonderful having you today. You bring back so many joys, so many memories that we shared when we went to Haiti to do our earthquake relief for the 2010 earthquake. And you also share some of your wisdom with doing your work around the world. Thank you for being brilliant. Thank you for your contribution. Thank you for making the world a better place. And thank you for honoring your us today by giving us your time to share with those who are listening about the work that we've been doing to make the world a better place. So awesome, thanks.
Thank you. Thank you both. Really was fun. I really appreciated this.
So much.
Okay. See ya.